Hi, everyone. Welcome to Dismantling Injustice, the podcast of the Brooklyn Community Bail Fund. At BCBF, we work with partners to free people from incarceration, whether it's prison, jail, immigrant detention, or surveillance. On this podcast, we offer analysis on issues affecting folks who encounter the criminal, legal, and immigration systems. I'm Hamad-Lipscombe, BCBF's Director of Advocacy and Policy, and I'm here with my co-pilot, Saleh Israel, BCBF's Director of Special Initiatives and the producer and creator of this podcast. So on today's episode, we are joined by someone who I've personally admired from afar, and I know that BCBF really loves, for her visionary and pragmatic leadership and her commitment to just uplifting, centering oppressed communities in New York. Katie Schaffer, from the Director of Advocacy and Organizing at Center for Community Alternatives. Katie helps coordinate a loose network of social justice organizations, which includes BCBF, who are pushing the Justice Roadmap, which is a blueprint for progressive criminal justice reform in New York State. You can check out the roadmap by visiting justiceroadmapnewyork.org. But welcome to the podcast, Katie.
Thank you.
Thanks. So before I jump into the roadmap, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself and CCA? What's CCA's mission? What's your work?
So the Center for Community Alternatives provides services and engages in advocacy and organizing with communities and people impacted by systems of incarceration and criminalization in order to eradicate pipelines to incarceration and dismantle systems of injustice and build a world where everybody has what they need to thrive.
Great, thank you. You all do amazing work. Of course, BCBF is definitely a fan, and you're one of our closest partners. But I wanted to talk to you a bit about the Justice Roadmap. And I guess my first question is, what was the motivation behind creating the roadmap? I guess it's been moving since 2018, I believe. What was the impetus?
So the impetus was twofold. One is that in New York State, like in a lot of places, there was a siloing of efforts between people who were trying to address the harms of the criminal legal system and people who were trying to address the harms of the immigration system. Even though there are many sort of overlapping issues, and the sort of carceral logics and the white supremacist logics that justify and legitimize each of those systems are clearly intertwined. And so part of the motivation of the Justice Roadmap was to bring together immigrant justice organizations and people working on criminal justice reform issues to come to one space and be able to collaborate across issues. The other is about sort of building power, that in order to win on any one issue, we need a whole lot of people and orgs to make that happen. And we want to make sure that all of our individual efforts are coordinated in strategic ways, that we know that to dismantle systems of incarceration and criminalization is not going to be achieved by just one campaign or one legislative victory. And so it's important that we have a place where we can bring together across a range of campaigns and demands what it looks like for New York to really move towards a more just future. And so that is what the roadmap attempts to do, both as a network of advocates and organizers running campaigns, but also as an annually updated legislative platform that brings together the key bills and issues that people across the state are fighting to win.
Great, thank you. For that description. And what's been accomplished so far? Are there pieces of the roadmap that have been successful thus far, or that are on their way to being successful or being victories?
Yes. So we are on this year's Justice Roadmap 2021. One of the campaigns has already been won, which was the repeal of the walking while trans ban. This is a statute in the criminal code that criminalizes, quote, loitering for the purposes of prostitution. And it was overwhelmingly used by police to harass and arrest Black and brown trans women. And that is a campaign that is a couple of years old. It was on the Justice Roadmap last year and again this year. And there was tremendous cross-campaign collaboration to try to move that bill last summer. And that helped to build the momentum that resulted in that legislation's passage in January. So that is a sort of very exciting Justice Roadmap victory.
That's amazing. And what's the reception been like from policymakers? How have policymakers responded to the roadmap? Has it resonated? Has it received any challenges or pushback?
So the many legislators have been very appreciative, frankly, for the Justice Roadmap, that it, in some ways, from their perspective, is a cheat sheet for what are the key bills and campaigns that they should be paying attention to, for those who see themselves as advocates for decarceration. It gives a list of what they should be supporting and co-sponsoring as far as legislation goes. It also means that we've been able to create space with legislators for them to hear about a variety of campaigns in one place. And so it has a sort of coordinating function for them as well. In terms of pushback, there hasn't so much been pushback of the Justice Roadmap as there is pushback related to specific campaigns contained within it. So for any kind of decarceration measure in New York State, we inevitably see opposition from sheriffs, from police unions, from the District Attorneys Association, sometimes from judges. And that was true on bail reform, which was on the Justice Roadmap. It's now true of parole reform. It's true of the halt solitary confinement campaign. And so we see that pushback show up anytime there is legislation to meaningfully address the harms of the criminal legal system.
Yeah, our opposition will always speak out on anything that would remotely free people. So that is not a surprise there. So recently, I know a number of organizations pulled together or organized legislator visits to jails and prisons. Over a dozen policymakers visited, my understanding, 8 prisons, 1 jail, and 1 ICE detention facility in the past few weeks. Can you share a bit more about what came out of those visits and what you've been hearing from folks that are currently incarcerated or campaign leaders about what's going on inside jails, prisons, and detention centers?
Absolutely. So those visits were designed both to highlight the health crisis behind bars and also to bring attention to the urgent need to pass the Justice Roadmap and all of the bills contained in it. And one of the things that was important about those visits is that it gave legislators an opportunity to see firsthand what a solitary confinement cell looks like, what it looks like to have people aging and dying in prison. And that is important in part as we push legislators on these issues for them to really have a sort of, however removed sort of personal experience of some of these core demands. And so it really achieved sort of that goal. Another sort of important goal was that it was an opportunity for some of our incarcerated members and leaders to be able to meet with legislators, to be able to talk about some of the issues that are most important to them, and for, at least in this small way, sort of incarcerated friends and family to not feel like all New York State lawmakers do is turn them a cold shoulder. And that's something we heard from our incarcerated members, that it was powerful to have legislators taking really seriously what their thoughts, concerns, questions, and demands were. And then it was also a way to draw press attention, to help amplify and highlight the demands of the Justice Roadmap and the sort of underlying issues.
And how are you hoping that these visits will impact the bills on the roadmap? Are there any particular policies that that you hoped to lift up via the legislative visits?
We lifted up a whole range of issues, and that included the Halt Solitary Confinement Act to end long-term isolated confinement. So we, in prepping legislators, made sure that they knew to ask to visit, shoe or keep lock, all of the various language that the Department of Corrections uses to talk about solitary confinement. We also worked with them to think about parole justice issues, including elder parole and fair and timely parole, and to meet with the Lifers and Long-Termers Associations at prisons where those exist, which are organizations of people incarcerated who either have life sentences or long sentences, so that they could speak with people potentially at risk of dying in prison unless change is made. So we pushed them to do that. We also had the legislators visit the medical unit, and that is an opportunity both to see what aging and dying in prison looks like as a way to elevate the importance of parole justice reform, and also for them to be thinking about urgent sentencing reforms. So those were some of the issues in terms of state prisons. For the ICE detention visit, we did a briefing with the legislators on New York for All, which is legislation that would end the collusion between local law enforcement and ICE. And so they were thinking about that issue as they went to see people who were currently incarcerated by ICE. And in the visit to the county jail, we talked about, among other things, the Treatment Not Jails campaign, and trying to create off-ramps from incarceration for people with mental health needs.
Wow, this is great. It sounds like the visits were really, really substantive and hopefully eye-opening for the legislators that were able to participate. I only have a couple more questions for you. And first is, and I know I didn't share this question with you, but I was wondering, is there anything that you're particularly hopeful about passing, or hopeful, will move this legislative session?
I try not to frame my thinking about the legislature in terms of hope.
That's fair.
Rather than sort of what we will demand and what, if we can organize sufficient power, we will win. The legislature should pass everything in the justice roadmap. And so then it becomes, at least on part, on us to build the kind of power to ensure that they do. And I think that is true of some of the campaigns we've talked about: health, solitary confinement, parole justice, treatment, not jails. It is also true for the No Price on Justice campaign, which has been advocating for a bill called the End Predatory Court Fees Act, to stop New York State from raising revenue through court fees off of the backs of often the poorest New Yorkers. It's true of some of the youth justice legislation, like ending the prosecution of children. Right now in New York State, children as young as 7 can be criminally prosecuted. So there is sort of a whole slew of really powerful campaign work happening. And this is the moment. Politically, the Democrats have a supermajority in New York State. They have run on issues of racial and economic justice, of which all of these bills are part of what that looks like in practice. And now it's about the fight to win.
And yeah, thank you for, raising that point. When we are effective with organizing, and when we, really take it to the streets and make demands, there's no need for us to hope. It becomes more predictable because we are forcing policymakers to listen to our communities and to listen to their constituents. My last question is, how can people get involved or support the roadmap or support your work at CCA?
It's a great question. So we have a monthly statewide organizing meeting on Zoom, open to anyone who would like to join. We'd love to have folks join us there. If you want to get our emails, you can sign up for our list on our website. You can follow us on Twitter at CCA_NY. And any of those ways to find us, you will get plugged into actions, events, ways to push your legislators, public education, narrative shaping work. There is a huge amount to do, and we hope you'll join us in the fight.
Well, thanks so much, Katie. And, I definitely encourage our listeners to get involved with CCA. CCA is the real deal, and you'll not only be able to have an impact, but you'll also build skills in organizing and storytelling and really learn how to move a campaign. Again, thank you so much for joining us, Katie. Again, you can learn more about the roadmap at justiceroadmapny.org. And thank you for listening to us and for all of your support for our podcast. This is a new venture for us, and the feedback has been so encouraging. So thank you. You can always learn more about what we do at BCBF by visiting us at brooklynbailfund.org or following us on social media, BK Bail Fund at Twitter and Brooklyn Bail Fund on